So don't worry, this is a gardening sowing project. This channel is not switching over to a sowing project. I'll tell you about my history of sowing in a little bit here. But I want to show you what we're working on here. And I just got it set up to get through with the sort of fussy bits. So this is what we're working on. Behind here is my climbing rose. It's an autumn sunset rose. And last year in a video where I showed you what I did with all my roses for winter, I showed you that what I normally do is detach it from the trellis, tip it over, and bury it. That apparently is called a Minnesota tip, I believe, right? I think that's what someone told me it's called. It's the Minnesota tip, where you tip it over and bury it. And actually, that worked fabulously last year. I had the best year ever with this rose, which has always done okay, but has never been, frankly, amazing. Partly because I could never get the canes to grow enough in one season to cover the trellis the way I wanted it to. The whole reason I wanted a climbing rose here was so that it would get tall. And if you have a lot of cane dieback, which is not uncommon in cold zones, it'll never get tall because it will grow, but to get it past that point and get enough growth on in 1 year, you're just barely going to reach it. In addition to that, this rose has also suffered from sawfly larvae problems traditionally, and I finally dealt with that this year in a way that I think has a lot of hope. I used diatomaceous earth. I don't know if it's the food grade one or not. I don't think for this instance it matters which one you use. And I dusted it starting early in the year, right about when, like early June. I dusted it, and of course now with diatomaceous earth you need to reapply anytime it rains because it doesn't work when it gets wet. And then I made sure to dust the ground around it. And it really helped with sawfly larvae. Very little sawfly larvae issues this year. Maybe it just wasn't a bad year for sawfly larvae, but that worked very well. So the good news is I didn't have to go through that process of the rose getting almost defoliated. And then recovering from that. Now, because the thing with sawfly larvae is typically like they'll eat the leaves, skeletonize them, and then new leaves, it pushes forth new growth, new foliage, and it's all fine later in the year. It's just really unsightly, but it does take a lot of energy for that rose to push out all that new foliage. So this year, I think I found a pretty good solution to manage that issue. But I don't love the way I've been winterizing this rose because I'm not able to dig a trench that's big enough to keep the entire cane intact. So somebody in that video last year suggested that I think about using a frost blanket around this. And since we have a white house, a white frost blanket actually blends in fairly well. So we're going to try that this year. So that's what we have here. I will put a link to the exact one I bought. It is not as thick as I thought it was. You can actually see my fingers through there. So I'm using a double layer of this. And I've just got it held with clothespins for the time being to make sewing this on a little easier, because that is, in fact, how I'm going to deal with this, is just sew this on so it stays relatively neat. I don't want it looking all baggy and terrible by the end of the year. Okay, and this is what I'm going to use to sew it on. This is a polyester or nylon thread, thick, that is actually meant for whipping the ends of lines. When you cut lines, it's a sailing thing, and I've got a sail repair needle here. This is one of those times when my sailing hobby overlaps with my gardening hobby, and so I get to use some of the same stuff that I already had to fix this. So just so you can see what's going on here, I do have a ton of leaves really piled up at the base, so the roots have extra protection here. And I'm going to kind of work around that to sort of tuck that in, so keep those leaves in there. Okay, so here's my sewing experience for you guys. When I was in like middle school, we had really cool summer school courses. It wasn't like remedial stuff, it was fun summer school classes. So I took the full load that I could every day of summer school classes because they were fun. And one of the classes that I took, and I can't recall if this was my idea or maybe it was my mom's idea, I don't know, but I took a sewing course. And so as part of the sewing course, I had to make a pillow. Now, the pillow that I made was peach which matched my bedroom at the time, which was peach and forest green. And that tells you exactly how old I am, because that was of an era. So this was making a pillow using a sewing machine. So this is my first experience using a sewing machine. And I managed to sew my finger. Stuck my finger right underneath there and sewed myself with the sewing machine. Needle sticking right out of my middle finger out the top. So I remember going to the office, where I'm sure those ladies in the office were thinking, like, how stupid is this kid? How do you sew your finger? And they weren't particularly sensitive. Anyways, my dad came up, takes a look at it, and they wouldn't touch it because they wouldn't touch this needle. So I still had the needle sticking out of my finger. They removed it from the machine, sticking out of my finger, and they wouldn't touch it because it had broken the skin. And my dad comes and he just yanks it out. Basically says, put an ice pack on it, you'll be fine. And sort of that's how my sewing experience started. I can sew a little. I do have a sewing machine, and I'll pull it out for projects about once every 3 years. I take half a day to try to figure out how to thread the machine. And then I try to get my sewing done more or less in a straight line and put it away. All right, let me just show you quickly how I finished that. So I sewed it all the way up here, and then I just did one loop up to here to try to keep the whole thing from sagging, and tied it off here, and now I'm gonna melt that knot just to hold it. Okay, so there it is. A rose sleeping bag, or maybe it's a Snuggie, but I mean, in the grand scheme of plant protection systems, I don't think that looks too bad, does it? Kind of blends in. We'll see if it works. This is always an experiment. You can see my sewing is, well, whatever, it's passable. But I will just be able to cut a couple of those threads and it'll come right out. So just one more quick note with this thing lurking behind me here. Really the best thing to do is just get something that's definitely appropriate for your area. But it's hard to tell that sometimes. This is absolutely a zone 5 plant, no doubt about it. It's just that sometimes the zone that they give refers to will it live, not will it thrive. So I do have a backup plan for this, and in fact I almost did this last year and I didn't, which is a rose called the Above and Beyond rose, which is a super hardy, and that's cane hardy, climbing rose. I think it might have been developed by Will Ratner, who did the knockout roses, but I'm not positive on that. So I know that people in zone 5 have had great success with it without any winter protection at all, with being totally cane hardy. The only thing that kind of pushed me off of doing that is, one, it always takes some time to get a rose established. I've got a lot of years into this rose. It's tough to give up on it because I know I'll set myself back 3-4 years probably if I start from scratch. And also this one has this beautiful golden color, which I think works well with the sort of vibrant colors that I like to plant here. That Above and Beyond is more of a softer apricot color, which I'm afraid might get a little bit lost in front of the White House. But that would be the backup plan if this fails, or if I just decide that I'm sick of doing things like sewing cloth onto the front of my house. Okay, so if you want to see how the little sleeping bag around the rose experiment works come spring, make sure you subscribe and like this video, and that way you'll make sure to catch those videos when we unveil all this stuff in spring, which really is only a few months away, even though right now it feels like a distant dream. All right, I hope you guys are having a great day in your garden, and good luck with your sewing projects. All right, see you soon.